I'm going to walk through the Roland V8 HD and try to give you a clear picture of whether it actually solves the problems you face when you need to juggle a handful of HDMI sources for a live stream or a corporate presentation. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The idea here isn't to hype a piece of gear that looks good on paper, but to help you decide if the trade-offs line up with what you really need in a day-to-day workflow. When you're standing in front of a crowd or in front of a laptop, the biggest hesitation most people have is buying a switcher that sounds like it can do everything, only to discover it's a handful to operate, or it forces you to compromise on picture quality. A lot of the best for streaming ads gloss over the fact that you might end up spending an extra hour learning a menu you'll barely use, or you could buy a unit that needs a separate monitor just to see what's happening. The V8 HD promises 8 HDMI inputs, a 5-layer effects engine, and a built-in multiviewer, which sounds like a perfect all-in-one. The question is, does that promise translate into real value when you're actually on the floor? And does it avoid the hidden costs that many entry-level switches impose? First, let's set the scene for the kind of setup where the V8 HD lives. Imagine a small to medium conference room where you have a laptop, a video camera, a media player, maybe a game console for a demo, and a couple of document cameras. All of those devices output HDMI, and you need to switch between them on the fly while keeping an eye on what the audience is seeing. You also want to throw in a lower third graphic, or a picture-in-picture layout, without pulling a laptop out to do it in post. In that environment, the V8 HD's 8-slot HDMI matrix becomes immediately useful. You can plug every source directly into the unit, assign each input a button, and switch with a single press. The fact that the whole workflow stays in HDMI means you don't have to worry about format conversion or lag that sometimes shows up with mixed SDI, HDMI rigs. One of the practical strengths that shows up quickly is the built-in multiviewer. It's a small LCD on the front panel that can display up to 4 sources at once, and you can also feed that view to an external monitor if you need a larger preview. In live events, that little screen lets you confirm that the camera you just selected is actually live, and you can keep an eye on a second camera that's queued up for the next cut. For a presenter who isn't a tech person, that visual feedback reduces the chance of an accidental blank screen moment. The multiviewer is also handy in a corporate training session where you want to keep a slide deck and a video playing side by side before you decide which one to push to the main output. The 5-layer effects and keying engine is another area where the V8 HD distinguishes itself from a bare-bones switcher. You can stack a background image, a lower third graphic, a logo, and then key a webcam on top, all within the unit. The ability to load BMP, JPEG, or even transparent PNG files into the 8-slot still store means you can prepare your branding assets ahead of time and just trigger them with a button press. In practice, I've seen users run a live stream of a product launch where they keep the product video in the background, drop in a brand logo in the corner, and then switch to a speaker view with a quick key. The whole process feels smooth because the effects are processed inside the switcher, not in a separate software layer that could introduce latency. Automation is another real-world benefit. The V8 HD lets you program sequencing, macros, and preset memories. If you have a recurring event, say a weekly webinar with a standard intro, a few pre-recorded clips, and then a live cue, you can set up a macro that runs the whole sequence with a single button. That cuts down on the mental load during the broadcast and reduces the risk of forgetting to fire a transition. The auxiliary output is also handy when you need to send a separate feed to a recording device or a different streaming platform. You can keep the main output clean for the live audience while sending a slightly different mix, perhaps with a watermark or a different graphic overlay to a backup recorder. Now for the trade-offs. The most noticeable limitation is that the V8 HD is an all-HDMI solution. If your workflow ever involves SDI cameras, professional decks, or older video equipment that only outputs SDI, you'll need an external converter for each of those sources. That adds cost and another point of failure. The unit also doesn't include any built-in recording capability, so you'll have to route the output to a separate capture device if you need a local copy of the stream. For many small productions, that's not a deal breaker, but it's something to keep in mind if you were hoping for a